So we are going to be learning about the mitzvah of Micah. And that is the mitzvah of putting up a fence when you build a roof. The pasuk in this week's parsha is Saitzay, of course, which is blessed with many mitzvahs. One of the most mitzvah-rich parshias in the Torah. It's right up there with Parshas Mishpatim and Kedoshim in terms of the number of mitzvahs. And one of them is in Perek Chav Beis, Pasuk Ches, Ki sivne bayis chadash, when you will build a new house, the asisa make legagecha, and you should make a fence for your roof. V'leisasim damim beveisecha, you should not place blood in your house, meaning to say, if you do not make a roof and somebody dies, that is blood placed in your house, meaning to say that that's the homeowner's fault. Ki yipal hanoifal mimenu, because otherwise, without the fence, somebody will fall down.
Rabbi, can you enlarge the text?
Yes. Better?
I think you could even enlarge it where it says 100%. You could just leave it the same font, but just go to like 125%. Yeah, something like that.
That's a good idea. Okay, how's that?
That's good.
We can go to 152. Why not? Okay. So now this mitzvah, of course, is one of the 613 mitzvahs, very important one. It applies, by the way, not just to rooftops, but to any dangerous space in one's house. If a person has a staircase, they have to put up a railing. Person has a front porch with the drop down to the yard. There has to be a fence, and so on. And here in the state of Florida, very relevant, that a person who has a swimming pool has to put up a fence around their swimming pool. This is actually a Torah obligation, even though it only speaks about a roof, but the concept of not having a danger in your house. Oh, 5 people are in the waiting room. 1 second, got to admit them. Okay, welcome to all those that just joined. Sorry, I just noticed you. So in the chat, you will find the notes for the shiur. And we were talking about the mitzvah of building a Micah, which is a fence. We were saying that it applies not just to a roof, but also to a railing, to a swimming pool, any place that might be a danger. It's in fact a mitzvah on which a person would say a bracha. Just like when you put up a mezuzah, you say a bracha. When you put up a Micah, you put up a fence, you can actually say a bracha at that time. You're fulfilling a positive mitzvah in the Torah. So in this class, we're going to focus a little bit on one detail of the mitzvah. It is that there is an obligation to put up a fence. If you don't mind to mute yourselves, if everybody can mute yourselves, please, and then you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. How can I do that? Maybe I can do that.
Yeah, you can mute everybody.
Trying to figure out how to do that. How do I do that?
I don't know.
Audio settings. No, that's not it. I need my children here for that. Okay, Not sure how, but I'm sure there's a way.
Button, wherever you have the audio, it shows mute. If you click on the arrow, it lets you select different options.
Nice to
Muting
hear
your
your voice, Isaac. It's been a long time.
no, I don't know. I don't know any other way to mute.
Well, that's not for me. I'm trying to mute other people. Oh, mute all. Here we are. Okay. You are hereby muted, but you are welcome to unmute yourselves if you have any question. Feel free. Okay, so the focus of this talk of the Rebbe is about an interesting halacha, which is that the Beis Hamikdash had a mica on it. The Beis Hamikdash had a roof, obviously, very tall roof for that matter. The Beis Hamikdash was 100 amas tall, about 150 feet, perhaps up to 200 different opinions about how big an amma is. And the Mishnah in Masechta Midos, which enumerates the exact size of both the width and the length and the height of the Beis Hamikdash, talks about the fact that there was a mica, there was a fence around the roof of the Beis Hamikdash. But, interestingly, when it comes to a shul, there is actually no obligation to build a mica around the roof of a shul. So this is something that obviously begs for an explanation. The Beis Hamikdash is the biggest shul and the most important shul in the world. Of course, it wasn't just for davening, it was for korbanos and so on and everything else that went on there. But nevertheless, it shares many aspects with the shul. And nevertheless, the halacha is that a shul does not need a mica, a fence, and the Beis Hamikdash does. So let's look here at some of the sources. Chulin 136a. The Merciful One writes, it's in English, but in the Gemara's language is Rachmana Amar, the Torah says, Ki yipol hanoifel mimenu, that a person may fall from it, which would make it sound like you have to put up a fence around any roof. So the Gemara says, why does it say gagecha ki sivna bayis chodesh v'asisa maika legagecha, which is what it says in the pasuk in number 1 in the notes, for your roof. Why does it say your roof? And the Gemara answers that it's to exclude a shul and a beis medrash. Gagecha is only your roof, but not the roof of a shul and a beis medrash. By the way, there's a different Gemara that says that gagecha does not exclude a house that belongs to partners. Sometimes when it says a singular expression, it excludes partners, and it's only talking about one individual person. But here, because the whole point is to protect people from danger, so what's the difference if the house belongs to one person or many people? The same danger exists. And therefore, gagecha does not exclude a shared house. However, it does exclude one thing, and that is a shul. So how do we understand this in light of this sifri on the pasuk that says, the quote that I have here is actually not directly from the sifri, it's from the Encyclopedia Talmudis, but he's quoting the sifri. Chiv Michael behechal lamdu min hakasav shnemer ki sivna bayis chadash bayis lerabois hechal. There is an obligation to build a fence around the hechal, which is the building of the Beis Hamikdash. This is learned from the pasuk that says when you build a bayis chadash, a new house, the word bayis includes the house of the Beis Hamikdash. And in fact, the Mishnah in Midos, the 4th chapter, Mishnah 6, says as follows. You can follow it along in note number 4. The Heichal, which is the central building of the Beis Hamikdash, was 100 amos by 100 by 100. So that the width of it and the height of it and the length of it was 100. It was like a cube. In fact, it was only 100 wide at the entrance point. Towards the back, it got narrower. But in any case, the Mishnah enumerates the size of each of them and how we get to the number 100 in the width, length, and height. So here's the size. The foundation was 6 amas. Then it rose 40 for the first floor. Then 1 amma for the ornamentation of the ceiling. 2 amas for the guttering in between the bottom and top floor. 1 amma for the actual ceiling. 1 amma for the plastering. And then there was a second floor. Not everybody knows, by the way, that there were 2 floors in the Beis Hamikdash. The first floor is where they did the daily operations in terms of sacrificing ketoras, lechem hapanim, the showbread, the menorah, and so on. But the second floor was really there just for if they needed to do repairs. In the first floor, they would lower the workmen from the second floor into the first floor. Otherwise, around the main rooms, you had storage rooms on all sides. But the actual rooms above the Beis Hamikdash itself, to the best of my knowledge, had no use other than to lower the workmen. In any case, the height of the upper chamber was another 40. Then 1 cubit, which is an amma for the ornamentation of the ceiling of the second floor. 2 cubits for the guttering, 1 for the ceiling, 1 for the plastering. And here it comes, 3 cubits for the parapet, which is the mica, the fence around the roof of the Beis Hamikdash. And 1 cubit, 1 amma for the spikes. In the language of the Gemara, it's called a kala oirev, what gets rid of the birds. You know how they have on the top of billboards, they sometimes have these rotating things that look like helicopter rotors to stop the birds from sitting there and doing their business. So they had like spiked metal on the top of the Beis Hamikdash roof to stop the ravens from sitting there and dirtying the place. Rabbi Yehuda says the spikes were not included in the measurement, and therefore he says the roof itself was 4 amos. Okay, so we're back to the question, what is the reason why when it comes to a Beis Hamikdash, we build a mica, and in fact, according to the Sifri, it's an obligation to build a mica, and when it comes to a shul, there is no such obligation. So the Rebbe gives 3 explanations for this matter. One has to do with a technicality. One has to do with a very practical difference. And the final one is more of a spiritual explanation. So practically, the technicality is as follows. The Beis Hamikdash and the regular shuls all actually belong to every single Jew. We may not realize it, but halachically, a shul is not the property of the rabbi. It's not the property of the president, nor of the board, nor of the members of that shul. Although obviously on paper and in Florida law or whatever state you're in, there are certain laws of ownership and whatever. Halachically, a shul actually belongs to the Jewish community as a whole. So, for example, in the olden days, when a guest came to town and he did not have a place to sleep, the shul was that was standard operating procedure was that the shul was used for such guests. In fact, it was called the hekdesh. That was the place where the guests would sleep within the shul. We even have a remnant of this concept in our weekly davening. On Friday night, if you're in a Nusach Ashkenaz shul, they make Kiddush. Now, nobody fulfills their mitzvah with that Kiddush. Because to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, you need to have a meal afterwards, which is why we have children who drink from the wine. Because an adult cannot drink because they're not doing the mitzvah of Kiddush, so they're going to be drinking before Kiddush. You're not allowed to drink before Kiddush. So that's why we give it to children who are not yet fully obligated. So that way the bracha on the wine is not in vain. But the question is, if nobody's doing the mitzvah of Kiddush, why are we even making Kiddush? And the answer is that the custom evolved to make Kiddush in shul from the time that it was standard procedure for there to be guests staying in the shul. And they would make Kiddush for those guests, and those guests would actually eat in the shul. They would fulfill their mitzvah. Nowadays, even though we don't have that practice anymore, but the custom remains to still make Kiddush in light of that custom. So it's like a leftover custom. So this is just illustrating the fact that the shuls actually belong to Klal Yisrael, even though they are obviously run by the local people, but technically they belong to everybody. And this is why the community, the local community, has a technical excuse, so to speak, and an explanation for why they will not have to build the mica, why they will not have to build the roof. Because the shul technically belongs to every single Jew in the world. We have, Baruch Hashem, many millions of Jews, I don't know how many, but hopefully more than 15 million. And there's no way for everybody to get together and build a roof for every shul, which they're technically the owners of. So that provides for an excuse for them not to make a fence around the roof. Now, it's interesting that an excuse is going to change the halacha, but this is not the only case where we have such a thing. Since we're in the month of Elul, I'll mention that it is customary in the month of Elul to check one's tefillin and mezuzahs. Now, technically, you only have to check your mezuzahs twice every 7 years. And your tefillin, if you use them constantly every day, you don't have to check them really ever, as long as you know that they were kosher at one point and use them constantly, because the air circulates when you use them. The mezuzahs, they stay in one place, so maybe they would get moisture in them and get ruined, so they have to be checked twice every 7 years. It's good practice to check them more often, especially in Florida with all the moisture, humidity, and so on. But here's the thing. If the building is a public building, then the obligation to check it is only twice every 50 years. So it goes in units of 7, which is like the Shemitah, or 50, which is like the Yovel. Now, obviously, there's really no difference in terms of how often a mezuzah might get ruined by the humidity or by the moisture between a private or a public building. But the rabbis recognized that when it comes to a public building that there's nobody really in charge of, if they obligate it to be checked on a regular basis, it's not going to happen. So they said, we're going to give you a pass and we're going to only obligate you twice every 50 years. And hopefully in that time span, there'll be volunteers to do it. So that's a technical reason why the shuls can get out of making a fence around their roofs. When it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, everybody knows the Beis HaMikdash belongs to all of the Jewish people. In fact, the Beis HaMikdash was built with money. The Beis HaMikdash was bought, with money that David HaMelech collected from all of the people. That's the land of the Beis HaMikdash. And then the actual building, Shlomo HaMelech, imposed taxes on the people. And those taxes built the Beis HaMikdash. So it was literally paid for by everybody. But here, it was a very practical and easy thing to do for everybody to build a roof. Because we had communal funds that was collected for the purpose of the building. And those same communal funds could be used to build the roof, the fence around the roof. So that technicality does not excuse them from building the fence around the Beis HaMikdash, and that's why it was an obligation. Okay, I feel like I'm lecturing for too long. So before we go to the second answer, let's have a time for questions if anybody has any questions.
Rabbi, is there a connection between that that it wasn't necessary to have a parapet to the fact that shuls don't need a mezuzah?
That is going to come into the second answer, yes. The idea that shuls do not need a mezuzah has to do with the way shuls were used in those days, and that is going to be used also as to explain why it does not need a fence. That's correct. That's coming up. Anybody else?
Why can't we say that the Beit HaMikdash is God's house? Just like a bayit requires parapet. The Beit
I'm with you, but why is the shul not? Beis HaMikdash is Hashem's house, and obviously you wouldn't want Hashem's house to be the cause of any deaths or tragedies. But why is that different than a shul, which is technically like a mikdash, like a mini Beis HaMikdash? That's the question.
Rabbi,
Yes.
yes, I want to find out where in the Beit HaMikdash did they put the treifa behemoths that where, for example, where the samana, when they cut the veins in the neck, if it wasn't done right, if it wasn't shechted properly, I understood that they put the behemoth in a room in the Beit HaMikdash. Is this emet? I mean, I'm trying to. This is something that I heard in a shir.
Not really sure of that. Not really sure of that. There were disqualified bird offerings that it says would miraculously kind of get absorbed into the ground. But I'm not sure about disqualified larger animals, how they disposed of them and where they were disposed of.
Well, I mean, if it had a mum, basically, then they couldn't use the animal.
If it had an external mum, they would not sacrifice in the first place. If it had an internal blemish that made it treif, then it was rendered an invalid sacrifice retroactively. But I'm not sure how they disposed of it. I don't recall. Okay. So let us go to the second answer. The second answer has to do with the usage of the Beis HaMikdash versus the usage of the shuls. Technically, a shul is a place where you're not really supposed to use it for your own personal physical needs. A shul is a place where technically you should not be eating, should not be drinking, should not be chatting, certainly should not be sleeping. It's a place that is really supposed to be used for holy activities. Now, a beis medrash is different than a beis haknesses. Nowadays, most shuls are also used for learning, not just for davening. But it used to be that shuls were separate from the places of study, which was the beis medrash. So the beis
And they use it for meals too.
To be able to use a shul for meals, you have to make a condition when you make
Yeah.
the shul.
You have to make it tonight.
Exactly. Because by the letter of the law, it's a problem to use it for meals.
But every Saturday they have a kiddush after the services.
Exactly. So nowadays, most shuls, because they have a kiddush, so it's like a self-understood condition that
Okay.
when they're building the shul, it's self-understood that the shul is going to be used for those things. But in the days that it was not self-understood, you would have to either make such a condition explicitly or actually not use it for such things. I don't know of any shuls besides one that still follows this halacha. It's my understanding that the Yekesha shul on the upper east side, is it the upper east side? Where's the KAJ shul? Adat Yeshurun. Does anybody know where that is exactly?
No.
So it's the old Yekesha shul in Manhattan, and it's my understanding that they still follow this halacha, and they do not have any kiddushes in shul. Their kiddush is in a different room, and they do it specifically because they want to follow this halacha of not eating in shul.
Well, we don't do it in the sanctuary, but we do it in the room next to it, which is
Right. So that's for sure okay, even in the olden days, because it's a separate room.
Yeah,
I'm
it is
talking
a-
about using the actual sanctuary itself for a kiddush. So that's only permissible if it was either explicitly said as a condition or if it was implicit, because that's what everybody does. So a beis medrash is a little bit different, because in a beis medrash, the chachamim were lenient, the sages were lenient, and they allowed a person to eat a kind of snack, because they didn't want people who were in the middle of learning to have to leave to be able to have a snack. Because if everybody's going to have to leave when they're hungry, that's going to take away time from Torah. Everybody wants a coffee, is going to have to leave back and forth. It's going to take too much time. So they said, we're going to allow you to have a temporary meal, a snack in beis medrash. And they even allowed Torah scholars to have a nap in the beis medrash. Again, so they could save time walking back and forth to their houses and use that time to learn instead. But, and by the way,
Sometimes people are doing that while the rabbi's speaking.
yes, indeed. Hopefully they're not snoring though. That's when it becomes problematic. So the point is that nowadays most shuls have a status of a beis medrash, because most shuls also have shiurim that happen there. So it's understood that they have the status of a beis medrash, which is why, like we said before, people do use it for a kiddush, a farbrengen. Sometimes they turn the whole shul into a hall, like, it's made intentionally with that in mind.
on a
So that's an
holiday.
exception. So that's an exception to the rule. But the essential rule, the way it was originally, was that a shul was really not supposed to be used in those ways. And the idea of using it was only considered like a shas chak, out of necessity. Now, the Beis HaMikdash was different, because the Beis HaMikdash, it is a mitzvah for the kohanim to eat the karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash. We think of the Beis HaMikdash as a very holy place, and of course it was a holy place. But we have to bear in mind that there was a lot of barbecuing and shawarma and all kinds of meat eating going on in the Beis HaMikdash. And this was part and parcel of the kapara that was brought about by the karbanos. Just like sacrificing the parts of the animals that had to be sacrificed on the mizbeach would bring about a kapara and an atonement for the person who brought that korban, so too the eating of the kohanim of the parts of the animal that they were supposed to eat, those that also brought about a kapara and an atonement for the people. So that eating was not just because the kohanim were hungry and had to be fed. That was actually a mitzvah. When the kohen would would eat the korban chatas, he would definitely say a bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvosav v'tzivanu lechol chatas, or lechol korban chatas. If he was eating a shlamim, he would make the appropriate bracha on the shlamim. If he was bringing an asham, a mincha, you name it, because it was mamash a mitzvah. Now, the truth is that most of the time, the kohanim would not eat in the room of the Beis HaMikdash itself. They would eat in the courtyard. But nevertheless, if there was no room in the courtyard, if it was a busy time, let's say it was one of the Yomim Tovim, when all of the Jewish people came to the Beis HaMikdash for Aliyah L'Regel, and it was just a madhouse, people coming and going in karbanos and kohanim, and there was nowhere to sit and eat like a mensch. You were allowed to take your korban into the Beis HaMikdash, set yourself up in a little corner, and enjoy your steak or lamb or goat or whatever it was. And that was a mitzvah. So before we use this to answer the question about the roof, I just want to quote the sources. Note number 5, I should say. Rambam Laws of Meister Karbanos, chapter 10, halacha 3. The sin offering, which is what we call a chatas, the guilt offering, we call that an asham, and the remnants of the meal offering, that's the shiyori menachos, the leftover of the mincha, may be eaten only by kohanim, by the male kohanim, in the temple courtyard, which is the chutzner of the Beis HaMikdash, the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Now listen to this is important. If they were eaten in the temple building, the actual building of the Beis HaMikdash, which is what we call the heichal, their consumption is acceptable. That's also good, because the pasuk says in Chumash Bamidbar, for all of their meal offerings, l'chol menchoisam, l'chol chatoisam, u'l'chol hashamim, the kodesh kadashim yoichalenu. That's the pasuk. In the most holy place you can eat it. That means it is acceptable to eat the karbanos even in the most holy place, such as the heichal of the Beis HaMikdash. And number 6 quotes the Gemara in Zvachim that explains it. This is based on Zvachim 63a, which explains that from the pasuk it would appear that it is desirable, not merely acceptable after the fact, to partake of the karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash, because it says, "B'kodesh kadashim yoichalenu." You should eat it in the most holy place. That's a wonderful thing to do. So why didn't they just have a regular setup to eat in the heichal, and that's where they should serve the karbanos? No, the Gemara explains it is preferable to consider the chutzner of the Beis HaMikdash, the temple courtyard, as the primary place where the karbanos are eaten, because the building of the Beis HaMikdash is a resting place for the Shekhinah. It's not befitting to use that as a place for eating on a regular basis, which eating is generally associated with a human need. Okay, so the standard place to eat was in the chutzner, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Nevertheless, the eating in the actual building of the Beis HaMikdash was a mitzvah, and it wasn't just out of a dechak, because you had no other choice. It's actually an appropriate place to eat, because it says, "B'kodesh kadashim mechalenu," eat it in the holy place. Now, we didn't allow it on a regular basis. We prefer in the courtyard. But when they ate it in the Beis HaMikdash, they were fulfilling mamash a mitzvah. It's different than eating in shul. Eating in shul is something that really should not be allowed. It was only allowed, like we said, out of necessity, so people could learn and not have to run home back and forth. People could have a coffee during their learning. But if it would be possible, we would say, really, the shul is not the place for that. Do that at home. So the eating is not considered an important component of a shul. On the other hand, the Beis HaMikdash, because it's fulfilling a mitzvah when you eat it there, and that is the holy place to eat it in, so when they would eat it there, it was considered an holy activity. And now we come back to the roof. When there is an obligation to build a fence around a roof, the obligation is on a place of dwelling. And we know from other sources that eating is considered a very important aspect of dwelling. We're coming up to the mitzvah of sukkah, and dwelling in the sukkah is defined primarily by eating in the sukkah. Okay, we also sleep in the sukkah. Many people do, not everybody does. But the bracha that the Chachamim made on the sukkah is only when you eat, because that's considered like the primary show of the fact that you're living somewhere, the fact that you eat there. So coming back to answer why there was an obligation to put up a fence around the roof of the Beis HaMikdash and not around the roof of the shuls, because the shuls were not really an appropriate place for eating. Therefore, they're not considered a base dira, a dwelling place, and therefore the roof is like it's like the roof of a barn or something where people don't really live. Whereas the Beis HaMikdash, because the eating in there was considered important, it had the halach of a base dira, of a dwelling place, and as such, it was obligatory to put up the fence around it. Okay, before we get to the third answer, I'll stop and take questions, because once again, I find myself delivering a soliloquy. Questions, anybody?
No.
No? Everything is clear? Okay. I'm glad it's clear. Okay, so here we come to the third answer. And this is an answer that explains things in a more of a spiritual light, not so much of a halachic light. We know that there are many layers of the Torah. There's pshat, there's remez, there's drush, and there's soid. There's 70 explanations for every matter in Torah. In fact, some say there are 600,000 explanations for every matter in Torah. Not just that, but 600,000 explanations in pshat, in remez, in drush, and in soid. So, 2,400,000 explanations. That's what you come up with for every matter in Torah. So here is the third explanation, which is a bit more of a deeper approach to it, not the halachic approach, but a deeper approach. The roof on a building represents a person who might have some arrogance. When you build a new house, you start a new project, you start accomplishing something new, something good. A house is a place where you have a family, where you're doing holy activities, bringing up that family, and so on and so forth. The roof represents the little touch of arrogance that a person might get from their success in their new activity. Whether the new activity is a household, whether it's a yeshiva, whether it's a koilel, whether it's any other act that is beneficial for the world, the fact that he's doing it and he's doing it Baruch Hashem in a successful way, can lead him to feel some arrogance. So the idea of putting a fence around the roof is that we're saying to the person, listen here, we know that you are doing something good. We're very happy for you. Keep it up. Don't stop. But that roof, that possibility of arrogance, put a fence around it. Control yourself. Try to stay humble. Limit your feelings of arrogance. Why is that? Ki yipol hanoifel mimenu. Because a person can fall off of the roof. That means the person themselves who built the roof can fall off on their very own roof. A person who did that spiritual accomplishment, that mitzvah, if he becomes too arrogant as a result of that, he can fall spiritually, because arrogance is a very negative trait. So he can fall spiritually. Also, and importantly, is ki yipel hanoifel mimenu. Other people can fall from that roof. Who are these other people? This is referring to the people that the one who built the house is trying to teach. He is trying to bring them in under the canopy of the Shekhinah. He is the rabbi, he is the head of the yeshiva, he is the head of the outreach program, for example, or any other leadership position, and he's trying to give them hashpah, to give them spiritual lessons and teachings. And here we have the problem that if he exhibits arrogance, and he doesn't put up a fence to his arrogance, he doesn't limit his arrogance, other people can fall. That means, first of all, they may not be able to accept his teaching because they can smell his arrogance. They sense it in the way he speaks. And they feel that he's not really delivering a message about Hashem and about the Torah, but maybe it's more about him and his desire to be the teacher and to be the leader. And that's at the very least off-putting. But worse than that, instead of them just not learning from him, perhaps they will fall further as a result of that. Perhaps the negative experience of the feeling that the other person, a person who's in a position where he should be behaving in a holy manner and leading in a holy manner, instead they get the feeling that it's about themselves and it's to make themselves feel good. That can make those that should be accepting that teaching fall. That means not just not accept the teaching, but even get turned off from receiving those teachings from other people, for example, because they can, God forbid, get even turned off from the religion. And this is something that is especially important in the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash is a place where it's the most intense holiness in the whole world. The entire world receives its holiness, nourishes its holiness from the Beis HaMikdash. A person might think, when you come to such a place of holiness, well, there's no arrogance. Everybody's humble in such a place. There's no need for offense. No. Comes along the pasuk and says the Beis HaMikdash needs offense. I mean, the Sifri says it based on the pasuk, because the holier you are, the higher position you're in, the more of a leadership position you're in, the more people look up to you, the more they have to get the feeling that you're not doing it for yourself, but that you're doing it for Hashem. So the holiest place on earth, yes, it needs a fence, it needs a barrier. We need the reminder to remain humble, even when we're involved in the most holy activities. And here the Rebbe quotes the Gemara in Menachos 86b. just to show about how the Beis Hamikdash is supposed to be the source of inspiration and spiritual teaching for the world. The Gemara says with regard to the Beis Hamikdash built by Shlomo HaMelech, I'm in number 7 in the notes. The pasuk says, and he made for the house windows narrow and broad. In the Hebrew, it's shkufim atumim. The sages taught in a brisa. Typically, windows are constructed to widen towards the inside in order that the light from the outside would be dispersed throughout the room. For the Beis Hamikdash, Hashem said, make the windows narrow on the inside and broad on the outside. As I do not require its illumination. Hashem doesn't need the light of the world. On the contrary, the light of the Beis Hamikdash is supposed to be radiated outwards. The whole point is not to bring the light of the world into the Beis Hamikdash. The point is to bring the light of the Beis Hamikdash, the spiritual light of the Beis Hamikdash, into the world. And if you question this and say perhaps the menorah was for light, maybe they didn't need light in the Beis Hamikdash. After all, they had a menorah. So why didn't they have windows to bring in light as well? To this, Hashem would respond, do I need the light of the menorah? It's I, Hashem, that for 40 years walked in the wilderness with the Jewish people, and the Jewish people walked by his light. Hashem provided light, the fire of the Shekhinah that was with the Jewish people wherever they walked. So if Hashem provides light for others, he certainly doesn't need light for himself. So therefore, the whole point of the base of the menorah is to show that Hashem Shekhinah is in the whole world. So this is the point of the Beis Hamikdash, to bring the light of Hashem to the world. And the point of the fence around the Beis Hamikdash is not to become arrogant when doing so. Now the Rebbe says, now that we have this whole Musar Shmuz, and we hear how important it is not to get arrogant, a person might say, you know what, maybe I'm not going to build a house, I'm not going to give the shir, I'm not going to do the program, because I don't want to be arrogant. And maybe if I will be arrogant, other people will be affected negatively. So I'll just stay at home and I'll just take it easy and that's it. So the Rebbe says, no, we have the obligation to build whatever house we are able to build, whatever spiritual accomplishment we're able to do. That is our obligation. At the same time, we have to do our best not to do it in an arrogant manner. But we cannot give up on the mitzvah just because of the fact that we don't want to be arrogant. Why should the other people who can benefit from us lose out because we're afraid of doing it in the wrong way? As an example of this, the story is told of the Mittel Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe.
Can I say something before that?
Yes, please.
I'm thinking the reason the windows work the way you said, that narrow inside, wider outside,
Yes.
shines light out,
Yes.
is because the walls are so thick. If it was a thin wall, it wouldn't matter, couldn't make it a big difference.
The walls were thick, that is true.
Yeah. So that's when it works, that inside narrow and outside wide, it shine out.
I hear you. I hear you. Yes. So the Mittel Rebbe had a policy that all the Hasidim that came to him would have to share the teachings of Hasidus that they learned from him on their way home. Mittel Rebbe lived in Lubavitch, which is a town in White Russia, and his Hasidim were spread throughout that area. Mittel Rebbe, by the way, was the son of the author of the Tanya, so he was a second generation Chabad leader. And he said all Hasidim on their way back from Lubavitch had to share their inspiration on the way. So there was one young man who would do that, but he was a very gifted orator. And his speeches were, the people would lick them up. They loved it. As a result of which this young man started feeling arrogance from his speeches. He would feel good about himself. And he said to the Mittler Rebbe that he wants to stop giving these speeches on the way back because it makes him feel like a Baal Gaiva, like an arrogant person, and that's not right. The Mittler Rebbe said a famous teaching, and here it is in Yiddish. At Sibylle soll von der Wehren, aber Chassidus sollst du chazern. You can become an onion for all I care, but you have to teach Chassidus. Meaning to say, you have a problem of your arrogance. That's a problem. You have to work on it. I'm not saying it's okay. I mean, the onions are pretty sharp. So maybe it's a problem, but you shouldn't stop teaching Chassidus because of your problem. The recipients don't have to suffer because you haven't fixed yourself yet. So this is the idea of not stopping to build a house just because you're afraid that you won't be able to build a proper roof around it. And that was point number 8 in the notes. Okay, time for questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, I have something. I think maybe the Rebbe meant that an onion is something that is like just the head is covered up. So you can stick your head in the sand if you want, but still teach Hasidus.
I don't know how you're going to teach it if your head is in the sand. The people have to hear you. The Rebbe explained elsewhere that the idea of the onion is that the onion itself doesn't really taste good on its own, but it imparts a good flavor to other things. So he was saying, even if for you it's not the best, for your spiritual stature, maybe it's not. But for the others, they will get the good flavor out of you. So it's worth sacrificing your own spiritual accomplishment, so to speak, for the good of others.
Your own abilities for others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your God-given abilities, share them, even if that brings them, somewhat lower than what you could accomplish just being on your own.
Rabbi, the print only goes to all the fuss over him and his, oh, I can't see. Oh, okay.
So here it is. Yes, I'll read it. The Mittler Rebbe once told someone to become an onion. This person had been traveling from time to time, spreading Hasidic teachings, but had recently decided to stop. All the fuss over him and his talents he claimed had been feeding his ego. Now he had to work on himself to diminish that negative aspect of his character. The Mittler Rebbe showed no pity. An onion should become of you, he exclaimed, but to teach others what you must teach them. Why an onion? So this is the Rebbe's addition to that. An onion is added to the pot not to be eaten, but only to give flavor to the chicken and the broth. Like the onion, you sometimes need to sacrifice your own personal growth so others may grow. Okay, any questions?
Oh,
But I copied to the chat something that I had from a sefer a long time ago. I bought it like 15, 20 years ago about it takes apart Yecheskel. I just put an updated one that has a more complete description of who it is who did it and where he got it from. But for the question that was raised about where did the Kahana meet, where did they put the Shechita, the sefer itself explains it all. But at least for the semantic, I just copied the 2 pages that had the image. You can stretch the words to read them, and you'll see every little thing. That's
Very nice. Yeah, I see it. I just opened it up now. Very nice, yeah.
Baruch Hashem.
Very good.
So to the
Okay, I
extent,
wish you all a good Shabbos. Thank you for joining, and see you next week with Hashem's help.
So Rabbi, you want to give us the 30-second takeaway?
Thank you, Rabbi.
30-second takeaway is when you are doing holy activities and imparting your Torah teachings and inspiration to others, do it in a manner that is not arrogant, be as humble as possible. But even if you're afraid of being arrogant, don't stop teaching, because the students shouldn't miss out just because you may feel arrogant. That's the 30-second takeaway.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
thank you. Have a
Bye-bye.
nice weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's my pleasure.
Shana Tova.
You too. Thank you. A good year.
Shana Tova.
Thank you. You too.